Hi, it's Dani. I'm jumping in here to share a mini-sode in between our guest interview episodes. So you might have seen that the artwork for the podcast changed and the title changed to Seeking Wonder. So that's also the title of my Substack newsletter, and it really brings together the themes of what I write and produce, which is mystical fiction, sci-fi that's influenced by mystical ideas. And then I come here on the podcast and then interview expert guests about what is actually very real about some of the things that I put into fiction. So the season that we're currently in on the podcast is about animal communication, and the short story that I wrote is called Dog Deities, and it's about a fictional society where people quite literally worship their dogs. So that's our current season, and we're about halfway through, kind of I'm starting to wrap up the interviews. And actually, I have an offer for you, and this is going to be in the show notes. If you've ever done an animal communication session, I would love to bring your story onto the podcast. I'm going to do a roundtable episode. We'll have me as well as 3 or 4 people, and we'll kind of do like a discussion, and we'll share some of our stories and talk about all things animals and mystical. So if that's you, I'm going to include in the show notes. You can DM me on Instagram, and I would love to hear your story. So today what I'm going to talk about is my dog, Bambi. She's a senior Chihuahua. She's 14. I adopted her when she was 10, so she had a long life before we ever met. But we've done a lot together. We've done a couple dentals. If you have a small older dog, you know about, their teeth. She's lost all her teeth now, actually, but, she's very healthy because of it. But what I wanted to talk about is really how recording this podcast has helped me, because I had done an animal communication session way back when I first adopted Bambi, but of course, and I was just fascinated by it in general, just the capabilities that we have to communicate with animals. So I was so eager to learn more about it, but of course, as I start interviewing people who do this day in, day out and know so much about it, I was like, oh no, I've got to get Bambi another session, because there's so many things that I'm so curious about, both learning about her earlier life and what that was like for her, but also, some of kind of the triggers between us. And mainly, the big thing is really the separation anxiety. So, I started to practice some of the things that I learned from the guests that I've had on. And so back when I worked in tech startups, we used to have a phrase, and we would say, "Are we eating our own dog food?" Which, because of the topic of this podcast, is so funny. Because also at one company I worked at, we changed it to, "Are we drinking our own champagne?" To make it a little bit classier, I guess. But basically, the idea is, like, if you're creating an app or some sort of technology product, are you using it yourself? Because you can get really disconnected from the people that you're selling the product to, the people who are using it, if you're not using it yourself. If you're using it yourself, kind of the pain points, and how to make it better, basically. So that's the idea. And it's funny because, eating your own dog food, like, at the time it sounds gross, right? But like, Bambi gets human grade food that's fresh. So it's actually not so bad. But all that to say, as I've been recording this podcast, I've been learning a lot, and decided to start putting things into practice, because Bambi's had separation anxiety for a long time. So I first adopted her. I lived in New York. I lived alone. And it was during the pandemic, so I basically didn't leave. So we were always together, except to go to the grocery store. That was kind of the one place I couldn't take her. So when I would leave, she would definitely bark. And I had like an old phone. So I downloaded an app that I could work as kind of like a baby monitor. And so I was able to know that she barked for a bit and then she was quiet. But she would bark if the neighbors walked by in the hallway. And yeah, so it wasn't, it was unfortunate. It was frustrating, but it wasn't so bad. Like, it wasn't that bad. But then I moved in with my family for a while. And even though she was with people, when I would leave, she would be very upset. So she was very much attached to her one person. And so my family, basically, they would take turns sitting with her, which is wonderful, that my parents were able to do that. But it didn't necessarily help the underlying issue. So recently I've moved into a new apartment. It's a studio apartment. I'm by myself here. And the doors, the entrances to the apartments are like very close together. So you can kind of hear people coming and going right outside. The mailman walks by. And so as I've been here, she's been barking when I leave, but it's like I'll leave to go teach yoga and then I'll come back about 2 hours later, and she's like very stressed, and it's like she seems like she's been barking the whole time. So that's not great. So as I sort of, back in the episode with Jamie, which is the first episode, Jamie Wozni, she talked about a client she had who also had a Chihuahua, also had separation anxiety, and she taught this client to basically send mental pictures. Because of course I would sit down with Bambi and be like, I'm leaving, I'm going to be on for this long, everything is fine. But that didn't seem to really help. But in Jamie's example, the way that she was able to communicate is not, because it's like dogs, it's like they know what's happening, they know what we're saying generally, but then sometimes speaking to them alone doesn't quite tell them. But it's kind of about like developing this language with them. And so the images is really interesting. So basically sitting down with Bambi, kind of like petting her, being really slow, connecting with her, and then I would kind of just like put my hand on her, and I would look at her, like look deep into her eyes as if like to tell her like we're communicating now. And then I would close my eyes, and then this is how Jamie described it. You picture a snapshot of you leaving, like you're leaving, the door's closing, and then you picture a snapshot of like her bed, or she can sit on the chair, or she can climb onto my bed. She's got her water. And so you picture all of those things, kind of like a slideshow, and then you picture the door opening and I'm back, and kind of also feeling like that emotion of like, I'm back, everything's great, yay. And so I did that a couple times, and then I just like kind of, I do Reiki as well. So I did like 3 minutes of Reiki, and then I left and I closed the door and I didn't hear any barking. And then I went to teach yoga, and then I came back, and like when I park in the parking lot, like the windows face that side, didn't hear any barking, walked up to the door, no barking, and I opened the door and she's just like sitting on the bed, not even facing the door. Like, she's such a guard dog. Like, she's usually like watching the door, like always. And yeah, she wasn't even looking at the door. She was just sitting on the bed, napping, and it was wild. Like, I truly was like blown away. So that was really, really cool. I tried it a few more times and it worked. I was trying to leave every day around the same time and going to yoga, whether I was teaching or just taking yoga. And so there was kind of that consistency of the same time, and that I was taking the yoga mat with me. There was a different day where I had to go somewhere in the morning, and I forget where I was going, but maybe I was just running some errands, and that seemed to not work. So it was just kind of like a different time of the day, different context. I was dressed differently. So she really likes routines. It would definitely be better if I had the kind of job where I was leaving at the same time every day. I think she would pick that up pretty quickly. But yeah, and then the other thing that helped was actually something that Renee talks about in her episode. That's the episode called How Animal Communication Works. And she talks in there about really like slowing down. Like, I would be leaving and I would, I'd have to be somewhere at a certain time and be like, all right, I've got to go, like Bambi, it's fine. Or try to do that picture thing I just described, but like very quickly. So, but yeah, I think there's definitely something to kind of like carving out that time, like a good 5 to 10 minutes before I go, and, really making that connection. And I'm going to talk, in a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that might be, and why it worked so well that first time too. So that seemed to be definitely an improvement, and definitely was like, as much as I love all of this stuff and obviously believe in it, doing a podcast series on it, it still blows my mind. Still, just wild, like to see that change. So then this week I went to a podcast conference, and I was really nervous about it because I was going to be gone for 2 days. And I had a friend who was going to come over. She could spend basically the whole day Monday with Bambi, but Tuesday she would be at work for a couple hours. So there was going to be at least like a 6-hour period of time when Bambi would be alone. And so I was leaving at 6 a.m. Monday to drive up to LA, then spending the night, and then coming back Tuesday night. And so, I did my best to kind of carve out that time, like I said, but I was definitely running late that morning. Some things just took longer than I expected. And so, I did try to do some Reiki with Bambi before I left. But unfortunately, closed the door and she was barking, and I was like, gotta get on the freeway, I gotta leave so I beat traffic so I can get there. So, I go ahead and leave, and then, once I'm on the freeway, I sort of grab my phone to put in the directions. And I see that I've gotten a text message, and it's a text message from a neighbor who's saying, myself and the other neighbors have noticed that your dog barks while you're gone. And so, I'm not that surprised, because there were a couple times where she could have been barking for maybe like 3 hours straight. And this was also 6 a.m., which is not a very pleasant time to be hearing a dog barking. But like to kind of go back into the deeper, there's always like the situation, and then there's what's going on internally. And for me, the trigger around Bambi barking kind of goes back, first that when I was planning on moving, my mom was worried that she would be barking and that it would bother the neighbors. So I have kind of like that, that created like a worry in me because it's coming from my mom. And then there's also something with me about feeling like I'm bothering other people. So like, for example, I went on a meditation retreat, and it was a silent meditation retreat. We were meditating for like 10 hours a day, all in the same room together. And I got a really bad cold with like a really disgusting cough. And so just that feeling of like, I'm making noise and I'm like a bother to other people. There's something about that that's like a pretty deep wound for me. I was really shy as a child. So, I see this text message. I'm, on my way. I'm going to be gone for 2 days. And like all of like the worst fears start popping up. Like, my neighbors don't like me. I'm going to be uncomfortable living there. And I only just moved in. What if they like come over to the window and they yell at Bambi and she like gets even more traumatized? How did she even get my phone number? She must have emailed, or she must have reached out to like the building manager, because I didn't give this neighbor my phone number. So then the building manager knows about this. Am I going to get in trouble? Like there's kind of like that fear around authority, being in trouble. Like I was always a really good kid. So a lot of wounds about like not wanting to like be the person who's in trouble. So I was just really like spiraling on all of these worries. And it's something I was actively working with, was like, I knew that I prevent myself from doing things I want to do because I think of something exciting I want to do, but then I have all of these worries come up. And so like, it was kind of like I was going to this podcast event, which is really exciting, was really going to be a good thing for me. But then all these worries were being like dug up to the surface. And so then I'm also spiraling even more of like, how am I going to find parking? I should have done more research. I don't know this area that I'm going to. What if my car gets towed? And I also was planning on meeting some people at the podcast event that I was going to share a hotel room with them, and I had only just connected with them on Facebook. And so then it was like, what if I can't find them? What if I don't have a place to stay? So it was just like, you probably know that feeling, like one worry comes up and then all of them come up. And sometimes they can be completely absurd, but yeah, you're kind of in that unknown. So in that moment, I was like, okay, let me stop for a second. Let me try to reframe this. How could this be the best situation possible? Even though it feels really bad right now, how could it be the best thing? And I was like, okay, well, maybe this experience is what Bambi needs. And somehow after this, we're going to figure out how to help her. Maybe just this time with me away is going to help, repattern her own expectations, and she's going to come out stronger on the other side. Also, maybe having this experience with the neighbors about dealing with a potential issue actually helps us have a deeper relationship. So it's not like I go back and everyone hates me, but it's like, no, like we actually, resolve it, and then they become these great friends that I can trust. So that felt much better. And so then when I did respond to the message, I was able to kind of just picture in my mind that, these neighbors are not out to get me. They don't hate dogs, but, I was just able to be like, hey, she's scared. We're in a new place and I'm aware of it, and I'm working on it. So to just really like emphasize, like, this is temporary, and also like reaffirming to myself, like, this is not the end of the world. I know lots of ways that I can bring in support. Definitely by doing an animal communication session, but also the stuff I've already been practicing has already been working. So I know that I can figure this out and it's not going to be permanent. So that felt much better. I got a very lovely message back from my neighbor, which just affirmed how much setting an intention can change our experience. So then I get to the conference, and I think I was just reflecting on how, I could sit there and I could continue to let this spin through my mind. Like, what if she's still barking? What if blah, blah, blah? What if she barks tomorrow? What if, everyone's mad? Like, that could continue to spin through my mind. But I already had spent all this money on the conference, all this time coming to the conference. And so, like, why am I letting these worries dominate my mind, take me out of the experience, and like reduce the potential impact that I'm getting from this conference that I'm at? So it just became, because I knew that worry was an issue. It was something I was actually pretty actively aware of, but going to the conference was like an experience that really exposed it, brought it to my conscious mind. And so actually in kind of a positive way was helping me see how much it had the potential to take over. And secondly, which I think was the biggest breakthrough, was that I realized that the reason Bambi is barking is because she has the same issue. So also, this was something that I talked about in Jamie's episode and Renee's episode, was this idea of how our dogs mirror us. And so, I would be like, Bambi has separation anxiety. Do I have separation anxiety? Like, I kind of like being alone. So it's not like a direct mirror in that way, but definitely with a worry, like how I would kind of like go down that rabbit hole of like, well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? Like for Bambi, even though we've been together for years, I leave, I come back. I tell her it's going to be fine. I'm going to come back. But when I'm gone, she still is like, well, what if she doesn't come back? What if something bad happens? What if, like, what's that sound? I don't know what that is. And so, she's like getting taken over by her own worries. So I was like, okay, so we're together and we're noticing this because we both want to heal this issue around worrying. And so just knowing that also gave me a lot of hope that as I work on that kind of energy or emotional pattern in myself, that then, if we're talking about energy, it's like our energy is like a field of information. And so it's like when I heal something in myself, it's like I'm downloading software, and then someone I'm spending time with can heal it in themselves too. So even just by us being around each other, if I, really work on releasing those worries, then I'm just by exposure helping her to do the same. That's kind of like if you do Reiki with someone, or even if you do like coaching with someone, if they've dealt with a particular issue that you have, they can help you with it, not just verbally, not just in like the information they share, but just even by exposure. So if you ever are dealing with something and can find a friend that's already dealt with it, it's not even that you need to talk about it that much, but just being around each other. So that's kind of a little behind the scenes of how that's working. So that just gave me a lot of hope. And that said, I still came back and booked an animal communication session and learned even more about what's the dynamic and why she's barking when I leave. And so, yeah, it did have to do with, so basically what I had felt was like that I really needed to slow down before I go out the door. And I was like, do I need to spend like 10 minutes sitting with her? Like, it's because the picture thing definitely seemed like it was working. Slowing down before I left seemed to work, but then it didn't seem to work consistently. And so what the animal communicator told me is it's actually more like my energy when I was leaving was like, I need to be what other people are expecting me to be, or I need to be like what this version of myself I'm expecting myself to be, kind of like performative. I think that has to do with like usually when I leave, I would be like, traffic's going to take me this much, so I need to be here by a certain time to kind of like be a good person. I need to be on time. And so that actually made a lot of sense. So it's not necessarily about like spending 5 or 10 minutes with her. It's more just like being really calm when I go out the door and like kind of cultivating that feeling within myself of like, I am fine as I am. I can show up as myself. And as I cultivate that feeling, then that leaves Bambi with like the energy that she's safe to be herself. So I did that the next time that I left to go teach yoga, and she did not bark on the way out. The other thing that we learned in the session was that sometimes I leave like classical music playing from my computer, or I leave a TV on, and that she liked that. Also that she liked the light to be not so bright, so closing the windows. But it was interesting because the only time in the past that I've left the TV on was actually I was house sitting, and so I had to leave her for a couple hours, and so I left the Taylor Swift Airs concert playing from the streaming. And I got back a couple hours later and it was still going because it's so long. But yeah, so she said in the animal communication session that she liked that. So that was helpful. But what was so interesting is that how the communicator explained it to me was that, you know, it helps her when the TV's going because she doesn't feel so alone. Because if she's alone and she realizes she's alone, that's when she starts worrying, like, what if she doesn't come back and so on. And I had never used the word worry. I hadn't talked about that at all in this session. I had just, said separation anxiety. So it was super interesting to me to have that sort of validated that that is, the dynamic that was going on for Bambi when I was gone, because that really just made a lot of sense to me, that it was kind of a direct mirror between the issue that I was having, that I was wanting to change within myself, was also what she was having. So that's my story of Bambi's separation anxiety, and how that idea of mirroring helped me understand how to help her, but also really incentivize me to deal with my own issues. And that's a really wonderful thing about dogs. So I hope that is helpful for you and inspires you. If you have any questions about implementing any of this, definitely feel free to reach out to me or to any of the animal communicators that I've interviewed. They're all people that either I've worked with personally or that I've taken classes with, or, I've been connected with them in some way. I've benefited from their work in some way, and that's why I chose them to interview. So, please consider booking a session with them. You just learn so much, and about yourself as well as about your pet and how you can help them. So highly recommend that. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to do a roundtable episode. So if you've done a session, or if you have one coming up, we'll probably be recording in a couple weeks. So definitely reach out if you have a story you want to share, because I know it will inspire a lot of people. And, what else did I want to say at the end of this? I think that's it. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this journey. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye.